Hey, welcome to the Soccer Specialist YouTube channel. I appreciate you checking this out. I wanted to give you a quick intro before digging into the podcast. Just so you know, I've been doing a podcast for a few years on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google, so forth, audio only podcasts. And I realize there's probably a lot of people who check out YouTube and don't listen to traditional podcast platforms. And YouTube also now has a podcast category for uploading. So I wanted to start uploading some of my podcasts onto YouTube. The information, you may hear some weird things depending on the date, like I might mention the World Cup or something, which isn't happening now, but the content itself is what I call evergreen. It's stuff that applies to you as a youth soccer player that can help you out, now or whether it was 6 months ago or a year ago. And so it's valuable information. It's not dated information, even though the podcast might have been, 6 months ago. So hopefully you would enjoy this. If you do, please give it a like or subscribe. It really, really helps out the channel, and I do appreciate it. And let's dig in.
Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Soccer Specialist Podcast, caffeine fueled and driven as always. Today, I want to talk about something that's really important for players to understand, but I think parents and coaches play a huge role in encouraging this and shaping this type of behavior because most of them are not going to get this on their own. It's sort of like the kids and the players that are aggressive from day one, right? They're 5 years old and they're just out there and they're running after the ball, and that's very few of them. More and more as they get older, other players will develop that, but the natural ability for those aggressive players, it's very few of them. And so is the approach to how they train, how they practice in terms of wanting to become a better player, right? So we're talking about the difference between average players and elite players. And obviously that's a huge topic and there are a lot of different things we can talk about. But and let me get this out of the way first, actually. Obviously there's a talent lottery, right? No matter how I trained or most of you or most anybody else in the world, we're never going to be Lionel Messi because we just don't have that natural talent. But that being said, I think there are very few athletes who actually reach their full potential, and great talent goes wasted all too often. And lesser talents turn out to be better players in the long run because of their mental game and how they approach their training and their heart and what they want to get out of what they have and what they want to get out of their sport. And so players who rely only on natural talent, with very few exceptions, they will eventually hit a wall. They will eventually come across players who are just as talented as they are, but work harder and want it more, right? So many average athletes make it because they're willing to do what other athletes won't. I think a great example of this for me is Carly Lloyd. Uh, Being near Carly, I actually got a chance at a coaches meeting in a local league. I got a chance to hear Carly speak. This is probably, wow, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. And she talked about how when she was younger, she wasn't pushed. She was such a natural talent that she was lazy in terms of developing because she didn't need to develop. And as she explained it now, she says, I would have hated it then. I would have disliked my coaches, but I'd wish I had had coaches who pushed me more. And the reason she said that is because when Carly got up to the senior team for the first time, it was a struggle. She had hit a wall and she was struggling and she didn't know if she was going to make it because she had never really had to put in the work before, and obviously she figured that out and overcame it. But again, her natural talent got her so far. If she hadn't developed mentally the way she did, you might never heard of Carly Lloyd, right? But the talent was there. Okay, so too many athletes, they either don't do that extra work they need to succeed. Carly's a great example that I just gave you. She didn't do it when she was younger because she didn't need to, right? Or they may be putting in the training, but they aren't mentally engaged in that training, right? So it's not helpful, right? It's not how much time you put in, it's how mentally engaged you are when you're putting in that time. Many players at young ages, and again, they don't necessarily understand this. That's why it takes the adults to help them out. They go through the motions, right? They cruise along on autopilot, right? They lollygag. Anyone remember that movie? Put that in a voice message if you know that pop culture reference. Hello, Allie out there, right? So they cruise through their warm up, not really thinking about what they're doing, maybe talking and goofing off as they do it, hit some dynamic stretches, some ball touches. They're not really thinking about what it is they're doing as they prepare for their training. maybe they do some foot skill work in the soccer, but they're not really improving because they're not mentally engaged in that process, right? If they run 2 miles, if that's part of the training, their time never improves because again, they're kind of going on autopilot, right? This is not how elite players train. Even their warm-ups have this air of intensity and focus and this desire to become better, right? And every single time you train, it's an opportunity to get better. And elite players, they take advantage of that opportunity much more often than average players do, right? Average players go through the motions more often than not. That's why they don't continue to get better, right? So this time is a gift, players. Athletic careers are all too short. Even the long careers are too short for those of you that love to play the game. So if you're not out there putting in the work, you have to know that someone else is. One day you're going to compete against that person, either on another team in a game you need to win, or for a roster spot or playing time on your own team, right? You can have less natural talent. There's nothing you can do about that. But never, ever be outworked in trying to develop that talent to the best of your ability, right? There's not a program, there's not a coach in the world, no matter how good, that can help you if you don't approach your training without the intensity, the focus, and the determination that it needs for you to keep improving and becoming a better player. So keep that in mind with everything you do, even if it's 10 minutes on the ball at home. Go out there and make that 10 minutes count. 10 minutes of focused practice and training with an intent to improve. You're going to get much more out of that than an hour of going through the motions and going out, going out to the field and maybe knocking a few shots from 18 yards and maybe hitting a few juggles with no real intensity or game plan or desire to get better because you're not really mentally engaged in what you're doing. Okay, now I'm going to end up digressing and going off the rails here. So we're going to call it a day with this episode of the Soccer Specialist Podcast. If you haven't done so, you can go listen to other episodes or subscribe to the podcast at thesoccerspecialist.com/podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or what have you. They're all there. You should be at this point by now be able to listen to it on that page as well, or be able to get access to the different apps or whatever you happen to use on your phone for your podcast. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.